Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts, your daily short format history themed variety show and weekly conversation series with the leading voices in history today. Today's conversation is brought to you by thecollector.com, the ultimate online destination for anyone passionate about art, history, and culture. Beautifully curated, easy to read, and perfect for history nerds who want reliable, inspiring content without the fluff. TheCollector.com is just waiting to be discovered. Today on History Shorts, we're stepping inside the mind of one of the most celebrated and most complicated figures in American history. Thomas Jefferson is everywhere in our national story. The Declaration of Independence, Monticello, the Louisiana Purchase, and the ideals of liberty, and the contradictions that have trailed him for more than 2 centuries. But who was Jefferson when he wasn't writing for the ages? What did he fear, desire, hope for, or hide? And is it even possible to understand him not as a founding icon, but as a flesh and blood human being? Our guest today has spent a career trying to do just that. Andrew Burstein is one of the nation's foremost historians of the early republic, the author of acclaimed works on Madison, Jefferson, Jackson, and the emotional lives of America's founders. His newest book, Being Thomas Jefferson, An Intimate History, asks us to look past the marble myths and the modern politics and instead search for inner Jefferson, the private man behind the public image. A quick word from our sponsors. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Delighted.
What was the impetus behind this research and book about this intimate aspect of Jefferson, and what surprised you the most once you got inside his head, you might say, in private world?
Well, I've written several books on Jefferson, but the one thing that professional historians have been more or less prevented from doing is to look at the psychology of personality and adopt some of what cognitive science has learned about the human mind. Because Sis Fawn Brodie 50 years ago published her best-selling Thomas Jefferson, An Intimate History, which she was the first to popularize the presumed relationship between Thomas Jefferson and President Slade. Weishaupt's sister is his Sally Hemings, and just about everybody knows this piece of history. But Fawn Brodie really alienated all of the scholars at the time, most of whom I came to know personally. And I wanted to become more objective about looking at private lives and of sort of what made the light of the mind different in the 18th, early 19th century, and in what ways can we universalize emotions? And so I kind of devoted myself to the study of the life of the mind and especially emotional connections in early America. So as the capstone to my career as Jefferson scholar, I wanted to do this. I wanted to recover the discipline of psychology as an adjunct to the discipline of history and not just continue with the dismissive approach that psychohistory is not history and is unreliable. I would not call what I do psychohistory, but it is multidisciplinary. I'm interested in literature, in the culture of letter writing, how people who were well-educated expressed themselves emotionally. What did they have access to? How did it influence them? In what ways did they censor themselves, and in what ways did they find subtle means to express themselves emotionally? So this biography of Jefferson is different from anything I've done before, insofar as I am, I suppose, taking more chances and being a little bit more provocative than a political biography of Jefferson would be.
We all know Jefferson for his monumental contradictions. Even when I teach Jefferson, I think I titled the class The Dichotomy, right, of the man. Liberty and slavery, obviously idealism and political ruthlessness, you might say. But after living with him so closely, do you think these contradictions become more understandable, more troubling, or perhaps just more human?
First of all, more human. Second, more trouble because he is generous, nurturing. Friendship governs his life, mentorship, personal loyalty. But he's also, and this will apply to his controversial and, frankly, the pseudoscience of his racism. He's self-righteous. He has fixed opinions. He doesn't apologize or go back and say, I might have gotten this wrong. I've spoken to people. I've lived longer and I've changed my opinion. He writes in a way that's very seductive when he writes letters to people he knows well and also to people that he doesn't know or perhaps has not even met. He's written, as far as scholars have been able to tally it, close to 18,000 letters. And the Library of Congress, you can go online and read in Jefferson's handwriting, and very often these are drafts that he retained. And you can see where he crossed something out and replaced it with something else. There are many ways to examine him as an intimate person who thinks about what he's saying on the page. And, your listeners should be reminded that this is a typographical age when book learning and reading, this and poetry, these are the ways that people express themselves most needfully. And we live in a visual universe, instant communication. What is it like when you live in a 5-mile-an-hour world where your closest connections, except for neighbors, of whom there are few if you live on a plantation or on a mountaintop, as Jefferson does. But with most of your connections, you may not see for 10 years, and yet you consider the emotional connection to be essential to your sense of connection with the wider world. So, you got to get inside the heads of people for whom the personal letter, to touch the tactility of a letter that goes through the mail. And by the way, they're written on rag paper, on paper that's much stronger than what our books are published in nowadays. So if you look at a book published in the 18th or early 19th century, the print will still be, it will not have faded, especially if it's been taken care of. And the thickness of each page, it just feels so good to hold. They're reading letters that are in the hand of, this is not the age of email, in the hand of someone who cares about you, and you really can communicate your personality through this medium. This is why epistolary culture that's what I wrote my doctoral dissertation on in the early mid-90s. And I've never stopped relating to how it is that men and women who, and most Americans were literate, they preserved their diaries as well as their letters. And for the researcher, it's so enjoyable. And this is how I was able to distinguish someone like Jefferson, whose lyricism, whose ability to communicate emotion on the page in this typographical and handwritten age. That's why he was beloved. That's why his political enemies saw him as secretive and seductive. So anyway, the bottom line is that what I aim to do with this book is to make his motives clearer, both his praiseworthy impulses and his ugly impulses clearer. And so that's what I've attempted to do in writing a comprehensive, deeply personal biography.
First of all, his handwriting. What do you think about his handwriting? Because, sometimes I have a lot, and people I talk to on the show, sometimes it's really difficult trying to get through and decipher what the heck it says.
His handwriting is unusually controlled. You get a sense, this man was a control freak. And I'm not saying that as a psychologist, in the popular understanding of what that means. He was a control freak. His environment, he took pains to organize, to tabulate, to categorize. Every one of his letters from 1780 2 or 3 to the end of his life, so more than 4 decades, were filed. He had just a 656-page index of the letters he wrote and the letters he received, who the recipient was, what the general subject matter was. So, this sense of organization actually is seen in his right, which goes from when he's very young, meaning in his teens and early 20s. It's has more of a flourish, but his mature handwriting is painstaking. It's rounded, not as so vertical as it is horizontal. It's small but not tiny. It's rounded in a way that you can discern, you can decipher everything he writes. John Adams is another who has a very different handwriting, but is also quite legible. Washington's is a little less legible. James Monroe, nobody can read. I don't know how anybody was able to decipher his handwriting. And Madison, who is Jefferson's closest personal and political ally, Madison, as you might expect, his writing is not stylish, but it's easy to read because this is someone, constitutional scholar for whom words are weighty. The Jefferson does, you can see in the way he diagrams the drafts of his letters, and this even includes the Declaration of Independence. And all of this, the Library of Congress website has all of this in his original hand. It's wonderful. You feel like you're getting closer to this man and his capacious reach, his knowledge, his book learning. It's, I don't think we will ever be able to do this anymore with historical figures of the 21st century because people don't write letters the way they did. And I mean, the internet can preserve everything, but it's more in your face. There's a lot less nuance. So this is, I'm speaking really to why the archive means so much.
So Jefferson definitely curated, if you think about the fact, these guys are writing these letters just like everybody and all the other founding fathers. They know that someone is going to read these letters at some point and perhaps judge them, right? And you might say that Jefferson curated his own legacy. He was very, I wouldn't say obsessed, but maybe that's a little strong with his legacy. But in your research, did you find any moments when his self-image cracked, when he kind of revealed doubts or regrets or truths that perhaps he tried to keep out of the public eye?
Precious few. You're absolutely right when you say he curates his life to tell his life story. He wants to make sure that it is written by a reliable person. And he tries to control the process, especially in his retirement years, making it appear that he doesn't want to take director's credit for what is clearly an impassioned desire to tell his story. His arch enemy in retirement, who outlives him by a good many years, is the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall, also a Virginian, Jefferson, a Republican, Marshall, a Federalist, who was appointed just before John Adams' presidency ended, just before Thomas Jefferson's presidency began in 1801. John Marshall was also the depository for papers of George Washington. And Marshall's multi-volume Washington biography, which was published in the last volume came out, Jefferson's second term as president, and it portrayed Washington as the savior of the country and Jefferson as sort of the anti-Washington who was undermining Washington and the Federalist agenda. That Jefferson was a troublemaker, that Jefferson's betrayal, as he saw it, in the last years of his life, the last years of the 18th century. Because of all these things, Jefferson desperately wanted to reclaim Washington as the hero of the Revolution, and then to supplement that by saying that Jefferson was the hero of the Republic. I don't know how else to describe this, but as inordinate ambition. He wants to be remembered. He wants the historian to tell his story as the man to save the Republic from becoming an aristocratic nation, dominated nation, the money aristocracy. Sure, he fears toward the end of his life that that's what's going to happen. He's the only one. I mean, he was succeeded. He served president 2 terms. He was succeeded by his ally Madison, who was succeeded by his ally Monroe. Monroe was Jefferson's protege. So the world, according to Jefferson, has been imprinted on American culture in the Virginia dynasty of presidents. That's 24 consecutive years of a Jeffersonian political agenda being enacted. And there's no going back. But Jefferson feels this intense need to codify historical consciousness, and it's one in which he does no wrong. This is difficult. It's difficult. On the one hand, it's easy to understand the impulse, but it's difficult to deal with Jefferson, whom we want to like for many reasons. The national creation story owes very much to him, to his pen, but his ego that he tries to hide is actually a driving force in his retirement years. He continues to write seductive letters, but the most interesting I find, some of the most interesting, are the way he tries to seduce potential biographers, and one of whom, notably, is a man named William Johnson from South Carolina, whom Jefferson appointed to the Supreme Court. So he wants the Supreme Court Associate Justice to undo the interpretation of Jefferson's career as done by the Supreme Court Chief Justice, who he sits on the bench with. So it's the story here cannot be separated from a personal angst. I should add, because we really haven't talked about it, Jefferson, I mentioned at the start that he was generous and nurturing. So his personal experience with love and loss is an instrumental part of this biography. And I think that when you look at how he ultimately becomes a political, some would say a fanatic, I don't go that far, but a politically ideologue, fearful of having and would undermine his legacy. I think a lot of this is rooted in the losses that he experiences and the trauma. He has what he calls periodical headaches, migraine headaches, that persist from the time he leaves college and enters the practice of the law, becomes a member of the Virginia legislature. Through his retirement, his migraines, if they're also referred to that way, end after his presidency when he's able to let go. These periodical headaches are so demanding of him that he will sometimes, and this includes in the president's house, lock himself in a darkened room for about 4 or 5 hours in a day over a period of weeks, because that's how he is reacting to the challenges of daily life. So he's a complex psychological subject. And the difficulty, of course, is how we, 200 and some years later, can summon the right kind of evidence to make informed speculation about someone who is of a place and time that we cannot possibly sense with any reliable depth.
So having spent years immersing yourself in Jefferson's psyche, life, and now this new biography, how has writing this particular book changed the way that you see him? And perhaps even more importantly, what do you hope readers carry with them after the closing, after closing the final page of the book?
Well, the first thing I hope from the reader is that I don't come across as being biased in favor or oppose. I've just described to you some of the things that trouble me about Jefferson's personality and the lengths to which he would go not to re-examine his publicly expressed ideas. But I hope that the reader feels that I am being as objective as a researcher can be, as a biographer can be, that I'm not trying to make the reader like or dislike him. I'm trying to reestablish the context in which he operated and explore what he did on the basis of motives that come to light because of how he expresses himself when he communicates with others. I'm trying to say that I've learned from this research, I've learned from the Deborah on Jefferson, that like any other person, he cares about how people see him. He tries to put his best foot forward. He also has a profound capacity for rationalization. But who doesn't? It's like saying, I've never told a lie in my life. Who would say that? So I think I've looked at him sensitively, and because I have spent my career trying to understand what makes them tick, in what ways they were like us in their basic emotional expression, reaction, and in what ways we can't possibly understand their world or their state of mind. Like his wife, after 10 years of marriage, 10 years of uncheckered happiness, as he refers to it in his autobiography, which is a truncated autobiography, 1821, where he's in his late 70s. And it doesn't really tell you much about the inner Jefferson. But nonetheless, the loss of his wife, when he was in his late 30s, which she was 33, was sent him into a tailspin. So the vulnerability that people have, the pain that they endure, that's the world that we're looking at. And I try to be sensitive to the various elements of everyday life and in what ways Thomas Jefferson was just a garden variety American aristocrat with an extreme sense of his own personal power on his own personal mountain. What is it like to be Thomas Jefferson? That's the way I begin the book. And hopefully the reader will come away with the feeling that, I understand much better what he had to grapple with and the ways in which he's an explainable human being and not simply, not a god. You can be an intellectual and also, someone who is capable of propositioning his neighbor's wife, So it's a holistic portrait. And we'll see, what the reactions are. I do expect, because of the provocation in its pages, that there will be people who either think Jefferson is a heroic figure and should not be treated this way, or that his sins as a lifelong owner of other human beings cannot be looked beyond, and that it makes him an obnoxious creature. I don't know. This is the first podcast I've done, and so maybe from what I told you, you already have a sense of how attached I am, or intrigued I am, or critical I am, and I'm not sure what the takeaway is, whether it's being fair, unfair, or what historians profess to be able to do but rarely can, and that is to declare their objectivity. We haven't talked about France, but the most emotionally strong influence on him as a human being comes in those 5 years in France leading up to the French Revolution, the storming of the Bastille in 1789, when his European connections transform him from a parochial Virginian or an American with nationalistic traits to a cosmopolitan, but also dealing with a world in which women express themselves much more openly and publicly. And he has a hard time imagining American women being anything more than the domestic goddesses of the children of the planter aristocrats in his native Virginia. He writes to a love interest in France, Maria Cosway, "I am but a son of nature, loving what I see and feel without being able to give a reason or caring much whether there be a reason." I think I've got that right. A son of nature. And this is the way he courts, he seduces. His love of nature, of the garden, is unmistakable. I mean, he's an architect and a landscape architect. His aesthetic sense is powerful. And it's one of those things that make him the everyman. I mean, someone with a jack of all trades. I mean, he's the aristocrat as Democrat, as Richard Hofstadter wrote in the middle of the 20th century. So to be a son of nature for Jefferson is to be small d Democrat, that he is the first man of the people. And he embraces this identity that his political followers grant him. And he embraces it wholeheartedly. He wants to be that. And before the age of photography, someone comes upon Jefferson on the road and they don't know who he is. And they think he's, he doesn't dress up like an aristocrat. And so he comes across as someone who could be anyone, not the president of the United States. He can go incognito. I mean, it's a fascinating world in which he lives. And we are blessed to have an amazing vocabulary that he's given us, just with those, 88,000 letters, as well as the public papers that he's produced. Philosopher, lover, medical subject. There are lots of ways of looking at this intriguing fellow. At this point, I still don't know. If I were sitting across from him in his Campeche chair, his rocking chair in Monticello, and we had an hour-long conversation, I'm sure I would adore him. But would I know him any better after talking to him for an hour? I seriously doubt that. I think, that charge of secrecy about him is probably accurate.
What a great way to finish the interview. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was really a pleasure.
Great talking to you, Peter. I enjoyed it.